right, everyone. Hey, everyone. Chris Russell here from another edition of Rec Tech Live, coming at you on a Halloween day here in the U.S. And we talk about time to hire as a North Star metric, how to create a fast and friendly hiring process with our friends over from Talview and my new friend here, Sanjoe Jose, their CEO. Say hello, Sanjoe.
Hey, hello, everyone.
Awesome. Well, he's in India today, and we're going to talk to him about creating a fast hiring process overall, and talk about Talview as well. Interesting new product on the scene. Just a quick couple of show notes here. Let's see. Next shows will be November 14th at 4 p.m. with Curious Thing, the digital interview hiring tool based out of Australia. So I've been talking about them for a number of weeks now, and we'll do a demo with them on the 14th. Again, 4 p.m., a little bit different time there. So they can talk to us from Australia on the next day. Is that right? And then November 21st, just announced, is how to use a video to attract talent with Abby Cheeseman from video job company Skill Scout. So we're talking to her about how to create video that attracts the right talent overall, and give you some tips around video creation and how that all works. So look for those in the next couple of weeks, November 14th and November 21st. Again, rectechlive.com to sign up and get started there. So let's see who's live. We've got Thaddeus on the line. Hey, Thaddeus. Gareth. Chad's here. And Sarah Downs. So welcome, everybody. Glad you're here. People are filing in as we speak. And let's get moving here, Sanjoe. So first of all, just give a quick introduction on yourself and tell the audience what you guys do there at Talview, if you could.
Sure. Thank you, Chris. Really excited to be here on your podcast. So Talview is a company which is focused on creating a new category of talent acquisition technology, which we internally call Instahiring, where essentially the focus is to build the fastest way to hire. I'll speak more about that during the presentation. A little bit about myself. I've been in the HR tech space for the last 10 years now. This is my second startup in the HR tech space. I'm an engineer by training, but I've been a hiring manager for quite some time. And I've always been intrigued by how candidate experience is probably a very critical factor in hiring success, and how companies can leverage the experience which you create to drive the right kind of hiring for yourself. So the focus of today's presentation is also largely on that. Look forward to having an engaging discussion today.
Yeah. Why is the candidate experience such a challenge for employers, do you think, Sanjoe, based on your experience?
So I think there are two aspects. So one essentially is there's always a war for talent, and especially in today's market in the US, where it's largely demand driven with restricted supply. You are always competing with multiple other employers for every candidate out there, and you need to move really fast. And many times when it comes to speed, you try to sacrifice on the quality of engagement with the candidates, and that actually lead to a poor candidate experience. Second is especially for this, and this is more true for larger employers than probably some of the smaller employers. But at scale, when you're hiring a lot of people, the hiring experience gets really, it becomes very subjective, depending upon the individual recruiter or the individual hiring manager involved in the process. And hiring managers or interviewers who are a critical part of the hiring process, they are not professionally trained to deliver a great experience, and that often leads to a poor experience.
Yeah. Well, it looks like we've got a bunch of new technologies out there now that are really starting to help with that candidate experience overall. So why don't we get
Yeah,
started and let's go into your slides and we'll talk about creating a fast hiring process.
sure. So I think I probably already gave an overview of why we believe candidate experience is very critical, and how speed is one thing which today is in demand when it comes to hiring process. So typically when you think about speed, especially as employers, you all often worry that, okay, if I'm going to optimize for speed, then probably I'm going to sacrifice my quality of hire. And that's often a misconception. So if you actually look at how humans behave, when we are posed with any kind of challenge, we always try to respond driven by fear more than anything else, and often we hedge our I would say being looked upon as, okay, you failed in hiring the right person by spending a lot of time on it. But if you look at statistics, statistics say a different story. Many times, the fact that you're spending a lot of time will actually have a adverse impact on quality of hire. And so from multiple aspects, time to hire becomes very critical, and that's the focus of today's presentation.
Okay.
So if you look at the recent survey published by careerbuilder.com, almost 78% of candidates say that the overall experience during the hiring process, they consider that as a very strong indication of how the company values its people. And today, every candidate want to work with a company which has a great culture, and where its people are being valued and being respected, and that starts with the hiring process. Unfortunately, uh, the stories which we have in most of the companies out there, that's a different picture. Many times, because of time to hire being very long, companies miss their business objectives. Either you forfeit a market to competition, or you're unable to participate and compete effectively in the market because your time to hire is very long, and that impacts overall growth of the company. But if you look at uh, like the overall hiring scenario, there are often companies lose talent in 5 ways. One is you have like endless screening steps. You have multiple touch points during the initial stage of the hiring process,
Mm-hmm.
which leads to kind of a very impersonal experience for the candidate, which is a significant reason for drop off early on. Second is a prolonged hiring process, where you have companies who are taking a lot of time to take a decision, or a lot of time to respond to candidates. That leads to candidates dropping off.
Yeah, that's a
Third is
killer one. I mean,
yeah,
I hear that one all the time. This the waiting process, right? I mean, in this market, you've got to be lickety split as far as engaging that candidate, getting them in the door, getting them screened, getting
yeah,
them interviewed. You can't waste any time there because they're just going to go look somewhere else and they're going to feel devalued, I think, as a candidate, right?
that's right, that's right. And a third is the quality of experience, especially the interactions with different people within the company during the hiring process. If the candidate doesn't feel respected or valued during the process, that leads to many times candidates dropping off. Fourth is the effectiveness of interview scheduling. Many times you have seen this is probably one of the longest steps in the hiring process. Many times interviewers or hiring panels, their availability become a big constraint for the recruiters to effectively manage the process,
Yep.
and that again leads to uh, dropping off of candidates from the hiring funnel. And the last one is delay in decision making. Many times, companies keep, in spite of all the screening and selection process, they keep additional steps in terms of offer generation, where there are multiple approvals required, or many times they keep decisions pending because they don't have a very structured decision making policy when it comes to whom to offer, and that leads to dropping off of candidates during the process.
Yeah, it's a good breakdown that you got there. I've never seen the sort of the highlights there of where the can experience does fail. So good slide there.
Thank you. Now, why do we believe time to hire is a North Star metric when it comes to talent acquisition? So, in general, there are four key metrics which employers focus on when it comes to hiring. The
Mm-hmm.
first one is time, how much time it takes for you to hire a particular candidate. And you always need talent like yesterday. So, time to hire in itself is always important. The second one is quality of hire, and most often that's probably the number one metric for most employers. Then there is candidate experience, and the last one being cost of hire. So, if you look at time to hire in itself is important, but it also has a significant impact on other key metrics. For example, if you look at quality of hire, the best candidates today are available in the market only for 10 days. So if you have a hiring process which is 40 days or 50 days long, which is roughly the industry average today, your ability to hire the best candidates are significantly limited. The second key metric is candidate experience. 6 out of 10 job seekers who drop out of the hiring process, they attribute that to a long hiring process. So either the company is taking too long to make a decision, or there is significant delay between different steps, and hence that leads to poor experience and overall low NPS scores for the recruitment for the organization. And obviously, the more time you spend, your cost is going to increase. You're going to spend more efforts and more resources. So what you see here is how time to hire has a significant impact on all the key hiring metrics, and how it's a North Star metric for talent acquisition.
Yeah, it's definitely. I would agree there. I think you really summed it up well.
Thank you. And why is that happening? So today hiring largely is a waiting game where in spite of applicant tracking systems being the central or the core piece of technology used for hiring, there is very little digitization in the hiring domain. Hiring is still largely offline, and there is very little automation. Mostly, you will see that requisitions are created at the beginning of the process on an applicant rank system. Then you manage the entire screening and selection process offline, and you come back to an applicant rank system only when you're ready to make an offer to take care of the
The audience too afterwards.
sure.
So.
So I was talking about how hiring today is largely a waiting game, where there is significant delay between different steps in the hiring process. And in spite of applicant tracking systems being available as a core piece of technology to automate hiring, hiring is still largely offline with very little automation. So if you look at how most companies use applicant track systems, you have the requisitions created online at the very beginning of the hiring process, and then towards the end of the process, you come back and you generate an offer from the applicant rank system. But all the in between steps, right from the time the recruiter reaches out to the candidate over a phone call to do an initial screening, to written assessments and interviews which are conducted. All of that happens offline, and there is very little automation. So what that means is, on an average, between the steps, it takes anywhere from a day to sometimes 2 weeks for a candidate to move from one step to another. And that leads to significant dropping out of candidates during the process. And the other challenge, because everything is offline, is also the fact that you are losing a lot of data, because none of this information on who is getting shortlisted at each round of the process, and what kind of um, profiles or what kind of competencies were the candidates assessed for during those steps, all of that data is getting lost, and you're not able to learn from the hiring process and continuously improve the hiring process. So that's the reality today, and that's one of the primary reasons for what we call a hiring lag to be a significant issue for employers today.
Okay.
However, if you look at uh, candidates today, all of them are used to using significant amount of technology during their hiring process. You have candidates managing significant aspects of their personal life, whether the way they uh, do buy grocery, or the way they order food, or the way they today travel between two locations. Everything is highly digitized, and they are looking for a similar experience when it comes to the hiring process also. And there are three components which we believe are very critical for a 100% digitized process, and we call it remote, automate, and reuse. So remote is really taking the entire hiring process online, and make it a anytime, anywhere, any device kind of process, where you leverage capabilities like video interviewing and online assessments which are remotely proctored, and also have mobile support for throughout the process, so that candidates can be part of the hiring process wherever they are, whenever they want to be. And by doing this, you eliminate the schedule and location constraints which are associated with the hiring process, and make the hiring process significantly faster.
Yeah. Let me ask
This,
you. Let me stop you there for a second. So
sure.
the video interviewing stuff, I'm assuming you talked about kind of asynchronous, where the candidate does it on their own time. You guys have video interviewing into your platform. What have you learned about video interviewing over the years, as far as the trend of it? How willing candidates are to use it? Those kind of
Mhm.
questions.
Sure. So we do. There are two main types of video interviewings. One is the asynchronous interview, where questions are predefined and the candidate responds to those questions from their smartphone device or from their PC whenever they have some time to spare. And the other is live interviewing, which is very similar to a video call, where you have a two-way conversation between an interviewer and the candidate. In both these cases, the significant advantage is that the candidate doesn't need to take a day's leave and travel to the employer's office for a first round or a second round interview, and that offers significant advantage to the candidate. So, unlike typically a candidate would apply to at least 6 to 8 jobs when they're actively searching for a job, and if they need to take out time to travel and do in-person interviews for all of those job applications, it becomes a significant drain of effort for the candidate, and that's where having a remote experience has seen significant acceptance from candidates. So today, on an average, we have almost 98% positive ratings for the experience driven through video interviews on our platform.
Gotcha. Okay. The auto scheduling of interviews is interesting. There's a number of tools out there that do that. I'm curious. I've also heard it's a challenge too sometimes, if you have, especially with multiple people involved. Just talk about what you've learned there around the interview scheduling, the auto scheduling, that stuff.
Sure. So we already spoke about remote as one of the key aspects of a digitized process. The second aspect is automation, and this specifically solves for the turnaround time between steps in the hiring process. So there are a bunch of aspects which we focus on automation from an Insta hiring standpoint, and the first one is how we can use a bot to do the initial screening instead of waiting for a recruiter to reach out to the candidate and do an initial telephonic screening, because often the kind of screening which you do is very repetitive, and you do not want to lose candidates just because it takes you around 2 weeks to reach out to every applicant on your website. So instead of that, you can use a bot to ask the basic screening questions, where you can include the bot as a widget on your career web page or on the social media. And by doing that, essentially you're making the process 24/7. Candidates can be get screened 24/7, and unlike a human recruiter who essentially can only speak to one candidate at a time or screen one resume at a time, a bot can process hundreds of transactions in parallel. So by making this uh, transactions parallel instead of serial, we also significantly increase the speed. So some of the other aspects of automation is interview scheduling, where again recruiters spend a lot of time going back and forth between the candidate and the interviewer to find the right schedule for a particular interview. But and there is very little value being added, and that's something which can be automated with significant percentage of accuracy today with the help of technology. And that's where we have seen automation being a major uh, aspect of interest for candidates from a digitized process standpoint. And the third pillar is reuse, where essentially, if you look at any high volume hiring employers, they scrub the same target candidate pool multiple times a year. And when I say high volume, even if you're hiring for for the same role more than once or twice a year, essentially there is a high probability that you are reaching back out to a candidate who has been part of your hiring process for a similar role in the past. And typically, what happens is for every role, you have around 6 to 8 candidates. One of them join your company, but there are always 3 to 4 other candidates who are a good fit, but did not end up joining because of a budget or a timing or a location issue, or one skill set did not match. But today, what happens is when a similar role opens up again, one of your recruiters reaches out to those candidates, and the candidate essentially has to go through the same interview process, the same assessment process again, which becomes a very poor experience and also very inefficient. And from that standpoint, that's where reuse comes into picture, because in a 100% digitized process, what you have is you have access to the complete context of the process which the candidate has gone through in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So you will have access to their past assessment reports, their interview recordings. So the new hiring manager can actually pull out these details, see the interview recording, see the feedback from, or the interviewer feedback, and then take a call on whether this candidate can move directly to a step 3 or a step 5 rather than starting from scratch.
What
And
if it's
that's
a
significant.
Sanjoe? What if it's a different position though, and maybe requires different skill sets? That data would be not totally relevant, right?
So it's highly unlikely that the candidate will come be applying for a role which is like 100% different. There's always in within a span of a year, the candidate might acquire one or two additional skills, or have upgrade one or two skills. But even then, 80% of their skill sets might be very relevant for the new role. And that's where you can, rather than assessing them from start, you can actually assess them only for the delta, and that saves a lot of time for the employers and also leads to a much better experience for the candidate.
Yeah, I would tend to agree there. So appreciate that.
Great. And we call this entire approach insta hiring. So
Insta hire.
essentially, yeah, and insta hiring is a hiring process that parallels a one-click consumer experience, similar to the kind of experience today which Amazon and Uber and Postmates deliver. And the focus is on drastically bringing down time to hire for organizations. So how do we do that? I think I did touch upon some very specific aspects of this, but if you put all of that together, this is how insta hiring will look like. You will still continue to use your existing applicant tracking systems as your system of record. That's where your requisitions gets created. That's where you generate your offer. But what Talview does is we sit on top of existing applicant track system and bring a lot of this capabilities on a single platform, which allows you to deliver an insta hiring experience for candidates. So it starts right at the top with capabilities to do AI based job distribution, where essentially we have AI based engine which is trained to optimize for the best return for your job advertising dollars, such that your job is automatically distributed in the best channels possible based on millions of data points collected across job boards at any given point of time. That ensures that you get sufficient number of applications in a much faster way than the traditional method where you kind of go to different job boards without any strategy and then hope that you get enough number of applications. So once you have enough applications at the top of the funnel, then there are two specific capabilities which we have. So one is the chatbot based screening, where you have a bot which you can deploy on the career page or on your social media page like your Facebook or some of the other social media channels. And the bot can do the initial screening on your behalf instead of you asking the candidate to fill a very long application form and then somebody calling the candidate to validate all the information being entered. The other capability which we have is 100% automated CV matching, which is again AI based, where we use natural language processing and semantic search to stack rank resumes based on their suitability for a particular role. So these two capabilities ensures that whether the candidate is sending in their resume or they're landing on your career website or social media, you are able to do the screening in a completely automated manner. Now
That's
the
is that
yeah.
also for like existing resumes in your database?
Yes, you can migrate your existing resumes in the applicant rank system onto Talview, and every time there is a new requisition generated, we will be able to recommend the best resumes from the existing database for you.
Gotcha.
And the third step is the cognitive remote proctored assessments, where often we have seen that employers use assessment as one of the steps in the hiring process. But to ensure the validity and reliability of the assessment outcome, uh, employers often require the candidate to travel to an assessment center or one of their locations to take up the assessment. And that becomes a significant lack of, I would say, a poor experience for the candidate because now they need to take a day's leave and be part of this process. But instead of that, what Talvi offers is we have a computer vision driven remote proctoring capability. So you can deliver different types of assessment. We today support around 1,800 different titles when it comes to assessments. And all of these assessments the candidate can take from their location of choice, and instead of somebody physically proctoring or monitoring those candidates when they're going through the assessments, so we use computer vision technology where we use face recognition and a bunch of other advanced AI-based capabilities to ensure that the test results are valid, and the candidate is not following any practice which is not in line with the test rules. And
Hmm.
all of these assessments can also be created, done as a part of a workflow where they don't have to log into multiple systems to go through different aspects. So you might have a cognitive assessment and a behavioral assessment along with a skill-based assessment. Typically, you would send the candidate different links to go through all of those assessment, and that becomes very difficult for the candidate to keep track of, and even for you from a reporting standpoint. But on Talview, you can create workflows which allow you to have multiple assessments back to back, and all of the reports coming in one place, making the experience a lot more seamless. And once you have your assessments taken care of, that's when interviewing come into picture. And here again, we have both asynchronous and live interviewing capabilities on the platform. And apart from just or beyond just delivering the interviews on the platform, we also have ability to derive a lot more insights from the video interviews which happen on the platform. For example, we use a technique called psycholinguistics to build a behavioral profile of the candidate from a video interview which happens on the platform. So you don't need to administer a separate behavioral assessment for the candidate. You get a behavioral fitment report based on the video interview which happens on the platform. And the live interviewing comes along with scheduling capabilities which allow you to bring in a lot of automation at that step as well. And now what
Your,
happens is, sorry.
Sanjoe, your video interviewing, is that, do you require, is there a certain time limit on those?
So we support like two different formats. One is the asynchronous, where there is predefined there are predefined questions, and you need to respond to those questions within a
Mhm.
time limit. The other one is the live interviewing, which is more free flowing conversation between the hiring manager and the candidate. I'll speak more about that in one of the subsequent slides, but at a broad level, there is a significant amount of flexibility in terms of how each employer would want to structure their interviews. And while the best practices are available as default templates on the platform, the employer can make changes to those templates.
Gotcha.
And the last aspect, the last aspect is that you are not losing any of this data. So all of this data which is getting generated throughout the process, everything from the matching scores for the resume to the assessment reports to the interview recordings and the interview scores, all of that goes to what we call a qualified warm pool. So all this information sit there against a candidate profile. So if a candidate comes back for another role in future, you have all this data readily accessible, and the hiring manager or the interviewer can actually decide whether the candidate needs to uh, do an assessment again, because now there is a skill or there is a competency which is not covered in the previous round of interview or assessment process. Or if everything is covered, they can directly move to an advanced stage in the interview process. So all the data becomes reusable from a Talview standpoint. Now I have a few slides where I'm going into details of most of these features which I spoke about. But before that, if there are any questions, I can answer those.
Yeah, and if anybody has any questions for Sanjoe, feel free to throw them in the chat there, and I'll ask them. So what types of ATSs do you currently work with, Sanjoe?
So we have integrations with most leading applicant rank systems, Taleo, SuccessFactors, iSIMS, Greenhouse. So we have done multiple integrations for multiple deployments for customers with integration with all the leading applicant rank systems.
Cool.
So, with respect to the chatbot functionality, which I spoke about prior to this, some of the core capabilities here include responding to basic queries from the candidate. Often, candidates have a lot of questions about the role, about the company, about the process. So, the bot can reply in real time to those questions. In addition to that, you can also configure the bot to do basic screening or preliminary screening. So it can ask candidates questions about the kind of skills they have, the amount of experience they have, their current location or preferred location. So any questions which you would typically ask in an initial telephone conversation or as a part of your application form on the applicant rank system, you can configure the chatbot to ask those questions and validate the candidate's response in natural language without a human need to intervene, without the need for a human to intervene at that stage. The bot can, like I mentioned previously, be deployed on career websites, so where we have a widget which you can deploy on the career website, or you can also deploy it on social media websites like Facebook or messaging platforms like WhatsApp.
Yeah,
It
I got a question for you. When
yeah.
it's on a career site, for example, what percentage of candidates will actually engage with that chatbot?
So it varies based from company to company, but a general trend which you have seen is candidates prefer to interact with the bot where rather than try and search for the right profiles themselves. So when you have a bot available, you can answer a few basic questions like your skills, the kind of skills you possess, and the amount of experience you have, and the bot automatically shortlist roles for you and present the roles for you rather than you having to manually search through and find those roles. So we have seen that engagement levels significantly increase once the bot is available on the career website.
Do you have like a general percentage though, would you say? Is it 20%, 50%?
So we've seen typically more than 50% of candidates engaging with the bot once it's
15?
available. 50, more than 50%.
50, okay. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
So on the video interviewing, since you had some questions, I think this slide would answer many of those. So on from an asynchronous interview standpoint, it's obviously anytime, anywhere, because the questions are predefined. So there is no interviewer on the other side. The candidate can respond to those questions whenever they have some time. They can do it in the evenings. They can do it from their home or when they're traveling on a train. So it's 100% mobile enabled and doesn't require them to have a high speed connection. They even when the candidate is on a slow connection, or even if the connection is intermittent, like they're traveling on a metro train or any of that, they can still continue to attend the interview without any interruptions. It
Are
also
they
support, yeah.
are they answering questions just in text form, or are they actually seeing a recruiter video of them asking the question?
Both options are available, but generally, we have seen employers preferring text because that allows
Yeah.
you to add a lot of different types of questions,
Yep.
and you can also randomize questions so that, especially if you are an employer doing hiring in large volumes, you would want to ensure that there is enough variety of questions rather than candidates memorizing all the questions and then trying to pre-prepare for with answers. You can also configure the timers on the platform. You can decide how much time the candidate should have as for preparation. Once they see the question, how much time, what's the maximum time limit for the answer. So all of that you can configure on the platform itself. And you can also have so all the video responses which you captured. You can also have multiple interviewers or multiple evaluators looking at those and giving you ratings. So especially if you have process where you have multiple interviewers involved in giving feedback. This supports that kind of functionality.
Gotcha.
So we spoke about automated scheduling. So what the platform supports is an integration with Office 365 or Outlook calendar. So every time you create a new requisition and you would have added a hiring manager to the requisition in the applicant tracking system, through integration, Talview collects these same details. And when you're ready to schedule an interview for that particular candidate, Talview would use our integration with Office 365 or Outlook to pull out the calendar availability of the interviewer. And we also have capability where we can collect the availability of the candidate for an interview during the initial screening process. And then we automatically match those availabilities and then recommend slots to you. And then you can decide whether you want to schedule an online or an offline interview on the platform.
Gotcha.
So this allows the recruiters a lot of back and forth and helps them to schedule interviews at the click of a button.
Yeah.
And this you have seen improves the productivity of recruiters significantly.
And it works with Office 365. What about like Gmail calendars at all?
It does work with Gmail calendars as well. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
And if you decide to do the interview online, the platform comes with a two-way interviewing capability, very similar to a video call. The facility again is mobile enabled, and it also comes with interview recording capability, so you can actually record the entire interview. And if you have a particular interview panel who was not available at that point, you can share the interview recordings with them and they can review it and give you feedback. And the recordings can again be reused for future roles. And all of this is done with the consent from the candidate. And you can also configure rating sheets on the platform. So at the end of the interview, many times recruiters have a challenge to collect feedback from the interviewers and they need to chase the interviewers. So on the platform, as soon as they finish the interview, the system will show them the rating form so they can fill in their feedback then and there. It supports up to five interviewers being online at the same time to do an interview. And it also supports private chat between interviewers while the interview is happening.
Okay.
And you can also ask the candidate to share their screen and do a presentation or write a piece of a code or any of that during the interview process.
Interesting. And I guess you can do this in a browser or you have a mobile app too, I guess, right?
Yeah. This will work on both the browser and the mobile app.
Gotcha.
So this is the kind of rating sheet which I was talking about, where this is all configurable. The recruiter can create this, or this can be auto created based on these skill sets which are already auto tagged to the requisition in the applicant tracking system. One of the other key aspect which we focus on is building a unique experience for every employer, which reflects their brand and culture for each candidate. So we allow customers to significantly brand the experience, everything from logos to background images, videos, thank you pages. So all of that can be significantly branded in such a way that it shows a unique brand for your employer, unique employer brand, and increases the quality of experience for the candidate. So this is an overview of how a typical process would happen. So rather than probably spending time on this slide, I will quickly show a video which kind of emulates a similar experience. Just give me a second.
Sure.
So what I want screen is a hiring process where the candidate is reaching out to the career website of the of an employer. So you can see how the bot is deployed as a widget on the career site,
Yep.
and the candidate can immediately start engaging with the bot. The bot will ask questions on their skill sets, so the candidate can respond in natural language, and the bot is able to understand that, and based on that recommend jobs for the candidate. One, it also collects like their location preference and all of that. And if the bot qualifies the candidate for a particular role which is already available, then either they can launch into an assessment interview process then and there, or they will receive an email where there is a link, URL available where they can start their interview process whenever they want to. So in this case, Acme is the organization for which the candidate is going through the process, and they are getting started with an interview process. As a first step, we collect the photograph of the candidate. We do some system checks to ensure that the candidate has the right system settings to do a successful process.
Mm-hmm.
And once that is done, we can also capture additional details. Like if you want to capture a photo ID, then we can use that to do um, a face match to ensure that the candidate is the same person he or she is supposed to be.
That's
And
interesting.
then, and based on the uh, kind of skill sets which are already part of that particular role, the candidate will be asked to go through an assessment and interview process. And all of this can be auto configured, so you can uh, configure the system in such a way that based on the skill sets which are already tagged to the requisition, the candidate will go through an interview and assessment process which is relevant for that. So the candidate first did an assessment which was a multiple choice question format. Now they're doing a video interview, and this is for a software developer role, so you can see the questions are in line with that. And now they also can demonstrate their skill using a coding assessment. In this case, for other kind of roles, it could be different. It could be a chat simulation, or it could be other form of assessments where the candidate can demonstrate their skills. So in this case, because it's a software developer role, the candidate can actually write a piece of code in response to a question posed to them, and they submit their responses and also give their availability for an interview if they get shortlisted for the role. And we also collect their feedback on the experience. So this is how the first step in the candidate experience would look like. Now this is the recruiter's interface where the recruiter can go in, see the responses submitted by the candidate, see the suitability of their profile to the role. I spoke about AI-driven behavioral report, which are able to generate from the video interview. So this is such a sample report where, based on the video interview, the system has created a behavioral report for the candidate. You can also see their code. You can see other submissions. And if you think the candidate has qualified for the role, then you can go ahead and schedule an interview with this candidate. So you can also see their video responses. So you basically you can decide what should be your process, who will review what part of the candidate profile. You can have different interviewers or different evaluators looking at different aspects of the candidates submissions. So somebody can look at the video response, somebody else can look at their code submission and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And once you decide that, okay, this candidate is qualified and you now would like to schedule an interview with the candidate, you can actually go ahead and schedule an interview with the automated scheduler available. So you can select who among
Cool.
interview panel available in the system should be the interviewer for the particular, and the system automatically pulls out their calendar availability. So this is their calendar, and in this case, the candidate, the interviewer has most of their calendar free. So you
Sanjoe,
can
we're
go.
losing your audio a little bit, so why don't you close the video there, and
Okay.
we'll start to wrap this up. But my last question is, tell me a success story or two from one of your clients. how they're using the platform to hire talent. Does one come to mind?
Sure. So we specifically focus on customers in two segments. So the first is customers in who use our platform for field hiring. So a lot of sales, customer service kind of roles. So one of our customers is Sephora, the luxury retail chain. So they had a challenge where they would see a significant drop off in the hiring process because of the long hiring process. They would take typically around 1 to 2 months many times to make a decision for some of their senior hiring roles. And with Talview, what where they adopted a automated screening at the top of the funnel, so that the number of candidates who are involved in the interview process is only a few candidates, and their interviewers are able to spend sufficient time with those candidates. We have been able to bring down their time to hire by almost 50%. So that's one example. Other segment which we focus on is customers in the services industry. So we have customers like Cognizant, the IT services provider, or Deloitte, one of the big four accounting firms. So they have hiring process which is highly distributed. So they have hiring managers in one location, candidates in another location, and this location difference becomes a significant challenge for them. And they also keep hiring in high volumes with significant churn as well. So having a standardized experience similar to what we just saw helps them to significantly standardize their hiring process and improve their quality of hire, and at the same time ensure that with a standardized experience, their quality of candidate experience also increases significantly.
Gotcha. One of the viewers asking, what languages is the platform available in?
So we support close to 8 languages right now. So we support, apart from English, we support other European languages, and we also support Chinese right now.
Chinese. Okay, very good. Well, Sanjoe, appreciate the time today. Are you guys going to be exhibiting any shows over here in the U.S. at all, or?
Yes, we do participate in a lot of the shows. We were at the ERE recruiting conference last month. We are doing a webinar next month, and then planning to be at the SHRM conference sometime early next year. So we keep doing a lot of the shows.
Awesome. Well, talview.com for all the viewers out there. Well, Sanjoe, again, appreciate your time today, and thanks for coming on RegTech Live.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, everyone. Don't forget next week, 2 weeks, November 14th, 4 p.m., demo of Curious Thing, the digital video interviewing tool. For Sanjoe and myself, we are out, and have a great Halloween, guys. See you next time.
Thank you.
Happy Halloween, Kendra and Sarah. Thanks for watching. Take care, Sanjoe. We'll see you around.
Thanks. Bye.